Before we begin, viewer discretion is advised. This story is meant for entertainment. What happens when a Hollywood icon refuses to play by the rules of modern television? The answer came on a night when millions tuned in expecting a light-hearted interview. A few nostalgic stories, a couple of laughs, and the effortless charm late-night TV has perfected for years. But within minutes, the mood inside ABC's Hollywood studio changed. In less than 20 minutes, a comedy show would turn into a battlefield. The audience had come hoping for laughter. They wanted to see Harrison Ford, the man who piloted the Millennium Falcon, cracked Indiana Jones's whip, and carried generations of cinematic dreams on his back. At 81, Ford was expected to smile, tell a few behind-the-scenes tales, and maybe joke about getting older. Instead, he delivered something far more explosive. Jimmy Kimmel, the seasoned host with a quick grin and a gift for keeping things smooth, thought he was in full control. For 20 years, he had turned awkward moments into punchlines and silence into applause. But this wasn't going to be another neatly wrapped segment. He was about to push a man who had never built his reputation on pleasing anyone, but on commanding every room he entered. And that was when everything changed. Ford wasn't there to promote a movie the usual way. He wasn't there to flatter late-night television or play the game of polished sound bites. He came with something heavier than a promo, something honest, personal, and unfiltered. The silence that would fall over that studio wasn't in the script. The confrontation that would follow wasn't part of any plan. And when Ford finally stood up and walked off the set, the world witnessed more than a guest leaving an interview. It was a cultural collision, old Hollywood grit crashing head-on with new Hollywood politics. Raw truth against rehearsed morality, a legend refusing to play along. And after that night, late-night television would never quite be the same. The evening began like any other episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live. A buzzing crowd filled the studio, their chatter echoing under the bright stage lights. The band played their usual brassy tunes. Cameras glided smoothly, producers nodded behind the glass. Everything was running like clockwork. Then Harrison Ford walked in. At 81, he carried himself with the quiet power that silenced even the most distracted fans. Time had carved deep lines in his face, but his presence was undiminished. Every step he took across that stage carried the gravity of someone who had spent a lifetime in Hollywood's trenches. He didn't need to smile to own the room. He just had to exist. Jimmy Kimmel, sitting behind his desk, knew exactly how to hype it. His grin wide, his voice booming, he called out, "Ladies and gentlemen, the man, the myth, the legend, Harrison Ford." The crowd erupted. It was a classic Kimmel moment. Enthusiasm, humor, and reverence, perfectly balanced. Ford gave the audience a small nod. Nothing showy, just enough acknowledgement before settling into the guest chair. The contrast between the two men was immediate. Kimmel was animated, full of movement. Ford was still, grounded, like a mountain against the wind. The first few minutes flowed easily. Kimmel asked about Ford's latest project. Ford answered politely, if briefly. They swapped light jokes about directors, old injuries, and dangerous stunts. The audience laughed. Kimmel smiled. Ford rumbled in that deep, gravelly voice fans loved. It was comfortable, familiar, late-night television in its purest form. But underneath, something was brewing. There was a sharpness in Ford's eyes, a glimmer that didn't match the casual chatter. When Kimmel laughed, Ford didn't always join him. When the audience clapped, Ford sat motionless, as though observing the whole scene from somewhere distant. He wasn't feeding on the nostalgia. He was waiting. The crowd didn't notice yet, lulled into routine. Kimmel didn't sense it either, confident as always that he could steer any guest back toward laughter. But Ford knew. He hadn't come here to play along. Gradually, the rhythm began to shift. Up to this point, Kimmel had kept things light. Then his grin turned slightly tighter, more pointed. He leaned back, eyes narrowing just a touch, and asked the question that would light the fuse. "You know, Harrison," Kimmel began casually, "you've been in this business for over 50 years. You've seen Hollywood change. What do you think about how the industry handles controversial figures these days?" The words landed like a weight dropped into still water. The air changed immediately. Ford didn't move at first. He sat silent, jaw firm, hands resting on the arms of his chair. Then slowly his fingers tightened on the wood. His eyes, shadowed beneath the lights, hardened. "What do you mean by that, Jimmy?" he asked, voice low but edged with steel. Kimmel leaned in. "Well, we've seen actors, directors, public figures, people held accountable for what they've said or done. Some call it accountability, others call it cancel culture. You've never been afraid to speak your mind. Do you ever worry about saying the wrong thing?" The question hung there too long. The audience, still smiling moments earlier, froze. Ford's hands clenched a little tighter. Then he spoke. "I think people should be able to speak their minds," Ford said, calm but unyielding, "without living in fear of having their lives or careers destroyed by a mob mentality." The silence that followed was absolute. No laughs, no applause, just the quiet weight of his words. Kimmel's eyebrows lifted slightly. His grin sharpened. He smelled a viral moment. "That's interesting," he said smoothly. "So you think some of the people who faced backlash didn't deserve it? We're not just talking about unpopular opinions, Harrison. Some of those cases involved serious allegations." Ford leaned forward. His voice dropped lower, each word deliberate. "I'm talking about the principle. Jimmy, there's a difference between holding someone accountable for real wrongdoing and destroying their career because they said something unpopular 10 years ago. The studio wasn't an audience anymore. It was a courtroom, every eye fixed on the two men. The tension was alive, pulsing through the air. Kimmel's grin faltered, but he pressed on. "But don't you think public figures, actors, celebrities, have a responsibility to be careful about what they say? Especially with sensitive topics?" Ford's eyes narrowed. "Careful according to who?" he shot back. "You? The Twitter mob? Some corporate boardroom? Or an algorithm written by 20 kids in Silicon Valley?" The line hit like a punch. The crowd sat frozen. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged worried glances. Someone whispered about cutting to commercial, but the red light stayed on. They were live. Kimmel tried to stay composed. "I wouldn't call it a mob," he said. "I'd call it accountability. When people use their platform to spread harmful ideas, there have to be consequences." Ford's voice sliced through the air. "And who decides what counts as harmful, Jimmy? You, network executives, or talk show hosts who think they're the moral compass of society?" The words thundered across the room. Kimmel stiffened. "I think most reasonable people can recognize hate speech when they see it." "We're talking about decency, Harrison." Ford gave a low, humorless laugh. "Decency. That's a useful word, isn't it? Broad enough to mean anything you want. Convenient enough to silence anyone who disagrees with you." The studio was now electric. The air felt charged, like right before a storm. Kimmel's tone hardened. "We can all agree racism, sexism, bigotry, those are wrong. When public figures promote that, they should face consequences." "That's not controversial," Ford interrupted, his voice sharp as glass. "There you go again, defining the debate so it always favors your side." Kimmel's face reddened. The usual rhythm, setup, joke, applause, was gone. This was no comedy. This was confrontation. "I'm not defining anything," Kimmel snapped. "I'm pointing out that bad behavior deserves pushback. That's how society works." "Society?" Ford shot back. "Or just your corner of Hollywood? Because where I come from, society isn't defined by groupthink in a Malibu mansion or corporate memos about who's acceptable this week." The crowd gasped. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a duel. Kimmel clenched his jaw. "That's rich coming from someone who made millions playing heroes who solve everything with violence. Maybe you're uncomfortable with the idea that the real world requires nuance." Ford's voice turned cold. "Don't talk to me about nuance, Jimmy. And don't pretend what you do here is anything but performance. You turn real issues into entertainment. You mock people to make others feel superior." Ford's eyes flared. "Old Hollywood," he said slowly. "We made art, not propaganda. We told stories, not sermons. We respected audiences. We trusted them to think for themselves." The audience was silent, breathless. "I use my platform to fight for what's right," Kimmel blurted. "To call out hate, to give a voice to the voiceless." Ford's laugh was harsh. "Don't talk to me about silence. I've fought real battles, seen real consequences, and I never needed applause to do it." Kimmel's face turned red. "You think age makes you wise? You're just clinging to a past that's gone. Ford leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. You want to know the difference between us, Jimmy? I don't destroy people to feel important. Real strength isn't tearing others down, it's lifting them up. And that's something you'll never understand.